Okay, in this video, I would like to continue on with showing everybody how a Leedskalnins Model T Ford flywheel worked at Coral Castle, and we're going to get into how it produces the Magneto dielectricity. I have to clarify something in this video. In my interlocking rotating magnetic fields video, I stated that I combined the two waves. I said it's a transverse longitudinal wave, but that's not correct because that's impossible. They're two separate things. So you have your longitudinal and then you have your transverse. Okay, your longitudinal is your dielectric, or the one that's faster than light. And then you have your magnetic that's light speed or slower, depending on if it's hitting an object or leaving an object. So I want to clear that up. I said that, I don't know why I combined the two, but I did. I was thinking everything went into rotation in my head or something when I said it, and I had it written down wrong on top of another word. And so I want to clarify that these are two different things, because we're going after the faster than light, the counterspace, because this is what you have going here. This is what we're after. We're after the DC, basically, or where there's no frequency, the 0 point. Because in space you have frequency where you have AC and you have the modulation of the frequencies. But this is what you need to keep in mind with this whole thing, is that radio frequency has the same fingerprint as AC. See, this is where I was going with this whole thing, with where I was almost combining the two. The RF has the same fingerprint as AC high voltage. The radio frequency current at high frequency, there's no resistance. So it's doing the same exact thing as your DC. So this is where I'm going with this whole thing. So let's continue. It's going at this whole thing right at the subatomic level, the subatomic hydrogen. I showed in my previous video that the 105-95 right angle relationship is very important because it has to do with the Earth and the Sun and radio waves. And it has to do also with the Earth and the Moon. This whole thing with the dielectric is, when you look up the term dielectric, it'll tell you dielectric polarization, orientation polarization, or distortion polarization. Orientation is at 104.45 degree angle between the asymmetric bond between the oxygen molecule and the hydrogen and the water molecule. So the 104.45 degree is the 105. It's showing you the same setup. Okay, your 369. Because it also can run the other way. Here's your 9, here's your 3, and then here's your 6, just like on a clock. Okay, so he's going at this whole thing at the subatomic level. Distortion, polarization. Okay, so keep that in mind. This other thing to keep in mind too is this number here, the 2.72, or the megalithic yard. What it is, it's really the centipedal acceleration of the moon around the Earth. From this you can calculate the gravitational constant. Okay, so like I said, there's this whole deal with the planets and how they line up. Because everything is floating in the same energy. Okay, so let's get on to the flywheel. It's all about that major right angle. And here you can see it at Coral Castle. Here it has his Magneto post set up here, and he's got his V magnets spinning past it just like it's set up in the Model T Ford. So it works like this. Okay, the Model T Ford ignition system remained the same through 19 years of production, even though the electrical system was supplemented with a starter generator and electric lighting in 1919. Henry Ford, so it says, designed the car with an internal magneto coil and magnetic system fixed to the flywheel of the engine. The magneto provides current to the 4 ignition coils, one for each cylinder, which in turn intensifies the electrical charge to create a strong spark at the spark plug. The discharge from the coil is triggered by collapsing the coil field by earthing each coil at the correct time by the timer, or the commutator, mounted in the end of the camshaft on the front of the engine. So that's your timer. So what it's saying is, this is my analog to Ed's wheel, this is my wheel, okay? When the Model T V magnets are spinning past the magneto post or past any coils he might have wound up around his wheel, because Ed's a MacGyver type of dude, and he might have had coils set up all the way around this thing, collecting as much electricity as he could. Okay, so Ed's spinning the magnets, doing AC, okay, past the coils, because the V magnets are set up with a positive, a neutral, and a negative, so it's running AC. Okay. So here we get into what the magneto does. The magneto, okay, the assembly is made up of 16 iron cores wound with copper ribbon and linked to the coil next to it in a continual loop, and terminating at the magneto post fitted to the top of the transmission cover. These coils are fitted to a ring, which is in turn fixed permanently to the engine block. The flywheel has 16 V-shaped magnets bolted to it, but Ed's has at least 5 stacked deep that I can count. And he's got them encased in concrete. Each magnet pole, north or south, sits next to the same pole, the neighboring magnet. As the flywheel magnets turn, they pass the iron core in the ring, the magnetic field inducing a current through the coil ring up to the magneto post. Okay, so all those are tying up to that magneto post. The faster the flywheel spins, the higher the current produced. Okay, so that's how this thing's working so far here. Here's a picture of what that coil ring looks like. 16 copper wound coils, and they're all strung together. Okay, so what it says here is that each Model T Ford runs using 4 coils, 1 per cylinder, housed in a box. That's the black box that features contact points for a power supply and contact points to the timer for each coil via a wiring loom and a contact terminal for a spark plug lead. The style and location of the coil boxes change throughout the years, okay? But they all do the same thing. With the early models, including the ignition switch, with the styles and locations in the box. Each coil assembly is housed in a finger jointed box. This is what I'm talking about, the black box that you see on top of the tripod. And is filled with tar or pitch. This tar not only hides the components, but is waterproofing. Okay. So the parts include a primary winding, a secondary winding, a condenser connecting the wires, and a piece of glass to divide the components. Like a dielectric, an insulation piece. Okay, so here's your black box with the tar in it. Okay, so this is important here. In the early cars, there was no battery or starting system provided, so the power supply to the coils magnified to create the spark at the plug leads was solely produced by the Magneto system. Okay, this meant that to start the car, the Magneto and all the associated ignition systems must be in good condition and correctly cleaned and adjusted. When the driver hand cranks the engine, they produce sufficient rotation of the magneto on the flywheel to generate the current to the coils. Once started, the engine obviously maintained the rotation and the ignition system became self-supporting in operation. Okay, this is what we're after. This is the key to everything. Self-sustaining energy. This is magnetodielectricity. This is what we're after. Okay, in later vehicles, when the driver hand cranked the engine, they produce sufficient rotation of the magneto on the flywheel to generate the current to the coils. Okay, so once you get this thing going, it basically powers itself. And this is exactly how Tesla's whole monopolar system is operating. This is basically what it is. It's a monopolar system in the Model T Ford. In later vehicles, it's fitted with a dry cell battery or electrical starting system. Okay, so what this thing is doing is when these V magnets start their rotation, they're spinning phi. Okay, they're doing the 1.618 Fibonacci when they start. So they're going into your rotation here. You're opening the spiral. You're opening the black hole. You're 1.618. Okay? So what's happening here is I'm going to go from this thing from here from YouTube. And it just talks like this. They're talking about the flywheel. This is someone else's interpretation of what's happening on the flywheel. It says that you're basically trying to either cancel out the magnetism from getting at the object, or you're trying to put as much dielectricity into the object as possible. Okay, so you're opening up a portal and you're creating basically a lifting device for propulsion. Okay, the rules of space are turned inside out and time becomes three-dimensional. Okay, this is Dewey-Larson physics type of stuff. The interlocked rotating magnetic fields are arranged in the flower life pattern. That's what I showed you before with the coral castle and the six-pointed star that it has. It's all about the interlocked rotating magnetic fields. This pattern would prevent the rotation of any as a sum and prevent any from remaining the same size. Okay, this calculates to being a growing or falling ion charge for any of them. The negative ions through positive heavy ions constitute a true space-time vortex of ambient kinetic energy. Its spiral staircase represents phi. Square waves, the flywheel center. This is called a pump Z carrier wave. Okay, these steps are the waves made by the flywheel Magneto, which passes by each magnet of the flywheel. Okay, the 24 centrifuges around one. Okay, each 6 becomes a new X concave radial so that a forever spiral occurs. So that's what you're doing. You're forever 1.6180. Okay, 4 discharges off the inner race through contact of the tongue results in linearization so that it can build up an inverted bowl as mass builds again and again. In the centrifuge, one of the poles will lose a fight and be held at bay around the perimeter. When used in an oscillation through a vortex, it expands and contracts, but the particles can't. Okay, so here we're getting down to the subatomic hydrogen level. And here it shows your geometry. When you got 3, it looks like that. 4, 5, so on and so forth. It keeps getting more complex, just like your cymatics. The higher you go in frequency, the higher the complex the pattern is. It constructed a circuit capable of zero energy and heavy iron displacement. The center of the flywheel, the path of least resistance for negative ion charge. Okay, action prevents any and all motion with these D waves. Okay, so this results in the the super conductive space. Okay, or you're gonna what science would call it superconductivity, where it's floating, where superconductors floating on the magnetism. It's the same deal. You're just getting right at the center. You're right at the dielectric center. You're doing this. You're getting to your counterspace where there's no frequency, just like a DC. But keep in mind, like I said, radio frequency has the same fingerprint as AC high voltage. Radio frequency current at high frequency, there is no resistance, so it's doing the same thing. Okay, so the center of the wheel of the path leaves resistance for the ion charge. Okay, this is coming from a Leedskalnins thread, project.avalon.net. Okay, so the AC transmission line pulls the magnets in from the air. Okay, so here's what we're getting into. This is how it supercharges the system. Okay, Ed's supercharging this wheel because he's doing this. He's making this thing into basically a synchronous motor using this whole thing called, what Steinmetz came up with is called synchronous parameter variation. So what it's doing is once this thing starts cycling and it's spinning the phi pattern, going into its forever infinite phi, what it's doing is the same thing that a synchronous condenser is doing on an AC power line transmission system. Between the AC cycle, there's this 0 point, just like the 0 point here for counterspace. It's the same thing. The AC cycle is always going up and down, but it's also always hitting that 0. Okay, so you got positive, negative, neutral at all times. In this wave cycle of the AC, when it hits this 0 point, the whole thing is sucking in ether at this point. Okay, it's pulling in magnetism at the 0 point. So when it hits and this thing is funneling, cycling, every time it hits that 0 point, there's ether getting sucked in, or more magnetism is getting drawn into the system. The power company's got this as a free energy device on their system, and it's called a synchronous motor. And it's immersed in hydrogen to cool it down and to cut the windage. So what Ed's done, probably, more than likely, is because all you need to do is excite it with a little bit of DC. So all you'd have to do is hook a battery up to this system now. And when you do this, it starts the whole deal with pulling in the magnetism more than it had before. And he's got his magnets stacked 5 high, so it's putting out way more than what the Model T originally did. So this is the whole thing. It's found a way to supercharge this whole deal. So I think that's where I'm going to end this video today. We're getting closer to how this thing is doing what it does. So I appreciate everyone for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks.